Welcome to ICAN Intelligence. All right, let's talk about IFRS 15. If you're prepping for your professional exams, you already know this standard can feel like a bit of a monster, right? But what if you could conquer it, not by just memorizing a bunch of rules, but by actually understanding the core logic? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big why, the core principle behind it all. Then we'll walk step by step through the amazing 5-step model that is the heart of IFRS 15. And we'll wrap up by giving you a bulletproof strategy to handle any exam question that comes your way. Ready? Let's get into it. Okay, first things first. Before we dive into all the rules and mechanics, we have to ask a really basic question. Why? Why does IFRS 15 even exist? What was so broken about the old way of doing things that we needed this huge new standard? Well, to put it bluntly, the old system was a total mess. Seriously. It was a fragmented jumble of different rules and interpretations. You could have two companies in the exact same industry with almost identical transactions, accounting for their revenue in completely different ways. For an investor trying to compare them, it was an absolute nightmare. This slide really paints the picture, doesn't it? Before, we had this chaotic patchwork of rules, one for selling goods, a different one for construction, and then a whole bunch of specific interpretations for things like loyalty points. IFRS 15 just swept all of that away. It gave us one single, powerful framework built on a core principle that applies to everyone. It was a genuine revolution. And here it is. This sentence right here. This is the heart and soul of the entire standard. For the exam, yeah, you probably want to have this in your back pocket. But what's way, way more important is that you get it. It all boils down to two things: showing the transfer of a promise to a customer and doing it for the amount of money you expect to get in return. Everything flows from this idea of transferring control. Okay, so how do we actually use that core principle in a consistent way? How do we apply it in the real world for every type of contract? Well, the standard gives us this brilliant, super logical framework. Think of it as our roadmap. This 5-step model is the absolute engine of IFRS 15. Let me tell you, in your exam, you have to structure your answer around these 5 steps. It's like a checklist for success. It shows the examiner you're methodical, you're logical, and you know what you're doing. So let's break each one down. Right then, steps 1 and 2. We're starting at the very beginning. Before we can even dream of recognizing revenue, we need two things: a real, valid contract and a crystal clear idea of what we've actually promised to deliver. Now, step 1 might look like just a bit of admin, but don't you dare skip over it. There are 5 specific hurdles you have to clear. The agreement needs to be approved. The rights and payment terms must be clear, it needs a real business purpose, and here's the biggie, it has to be probable that you'll actually collect the money. If you fail any one of these, you stop. The IFRS 15 journey ends right there. Okay, exam alert. This is one of the examiner's favorite little traps. They'll give you a scenario where at the beginning, you're not so sure you'll get paid. The probable collection criterion isn't met. So what do you do if you've already received cash from the customer? And here's the knockout rule. You cannot recognize revenue, period. Any cash you've received is not yours yet. It's a liability. It sits on your balance sheet, basically saying, I owe something for this cash. You can only recognize it as revenue later if the contract becomes valid or if the contract is canceled and the payment is non-refundable. Okay, moving on to step 2. And listen up, because this is, without a doubt, the most critical, most judgmental step in the entire model. This is where you win or lose the most marks in an exam. A performance obligation is just a fancy way of saying a promise. But identifying these promises correctly, that is everything. Get this wrong, and the rest of your answer will be wrong too. So what makes a promise a separate thing? It has to pass 2 tests. Think of it like a 2-part security check. First, is it capable of being distinct? In simple terms, could the customer use it on its own? Could you sell it separately? Second, is it distinct in the context of the contract? Is it really a separate promise or just one input to a larger combined item? It's got to pass both checks to be treated as a separate performance obligation. Okay, deep breath. We figured out what we're delivering. Now we get to the money part. Steps 3 and 4 are all about figuring out the total price tag for the contract and then how we carve up that price between those promises we just identified. So step 3, what's the transaction price? This is the total pot of money we think we're going to get. And I want you to really focus on that word expects. This isn't just the price on the invoice. It's our best estimate of what we'll ultimately receive. Oh, and of course we ignore things like sales tax. That's not our money. We're just collecting it for the government. And this is where it gets tricky. Variable consideration. The real world is messy, right? Prices aren't always fixed. You've got discounts, refunds, performance bonuses, you name it. Anything that could make that final price go up or down, we have to estimate it right at the very start of the contract.
So, how on earth do you account for a price that might change? The standard gives us two methods, two tools in our toolbox. The expected value method is perfect when you have a large number of similar contracts. You can use historical data to create a probability-weighted average. But if you've only got two possible outcomes, like you either get the bonus or you don't, then the most likely amount is a much better fit. The key is to pick the method that gives you the best prediction.
But hold on, just because we've estimated it doesn't mean we can book it. And this right here is a massive flashing red light for your exam. It's called the constraint. You can only include that variable amount in your revenue if it is highly probable that you won't have to give it back later. Highly probable is a really, really high bar. The standard is basically screaming at you, be careful, don't recognize revenue you might have to reverse. And now for step 4, where we take that total price and allocate it. How? We use the relative standalone selling prices. Let's make this real with the mobile phone example. On their own, the handset would sell for €800 and the service for €200. That's a total value of €1,000, but the customer is only paying €900. So we allocate that €900 based on the value split. The handset is 80% of the standalone value, so it gets 80% of the revenue, which is €720. Simple as that. All right, we are at the finish line of the 5-step model. We know our promises, and we've assigned a value to each one. Now for the final and most important piece of the puzzle. When? When do we actually get to put this in the books as revenue? Step 5 is all about timing, and the magic word here is control. Revenue is recognized when control of the promised good or service passes to the customer. And that can happen in two ways. Either gradually, over time, think of a Netflix subscription, or bam, all at once, at a point in time, like buying a cup of coffee. The standard gives us clear rules to figure out which one it is. Now here's a pro tip for your exam. You always test for overtime recognition first. If your scenario meets just one of these 3 criteria, you're done. It's overtime. For example, number 1, the customer gets the benefit as you do the work, like a weekly cleaning service. If you check all 3 and none of them fit, then and only then do you default to recognizing revenue at a point in time. So if we've decided it's point in time, the next question is, which point? To help us, the standard gives us these helpful indicators. Now be careful, these aren't strict criteria like the last slide. They're more like clues. They help us build a case and use our judgment to pinpoint the exact moment that control really transferred from us to the customer. Okay, one last thing before we recap. IFRS 15 introduces 2 key terms for our balance sheet. A contract liability is simple. It's when the customer pays you upfront. You have their cash, but you still owe them the service. It's basically deferred revenue. A contract asset is a bit different. That's when you've done the work and earns the revenue, but you can't send the bill just yet because some other condition has to be met first. Whew, okay, we have been through a lot. The core principle, all 5 steps of the model. Now let's pull it all together. Let's build that mental framework that will let you walk into your exam and absolutely nail any IFRS 15 question. Just look at how beautifully this flows. It's a story. You start with the main theme, the core principle. Step 1 asks, do we even have a story to tell? Is the contract valid? Step 2, what are the chapters of our story? The promises. Step 3, what's the total value of the book? The price. Step 4, how much is each chapter worth? The allocation. And finally, step 5, when do we mark each chapter as complete? The recognition. It's a perfect logical sequence. Okay, listen, when that exam paper opens and you see an IFRS 15 question, don't panic. This is your game plan. First sentence, state the core principle. Then, methodically walk through the 5 steps, one by one. Use the numbers and facts from the question, and please, justify your thinking, especially for step 2. That's where you really show your stuff. Mention variable consideration, mention the constraint, and reference the specific criteria for timing. Follow this structure and you'll be golden. So let me leave you with a little challenge. Next time you see an ad for a new phone contract with a free handset, I want you to stop and think like an accountant. You and I both know that phone isn't really free, so using our 5-step model, How would you account for it? What are the promises? How would you allocate the price? And when would you recognize the revenue for the phone versus the service? The answer is right there in the framework we just built. And that is a wrap on our deep dive into IFRS 15. Thank you so much for working through this with me. I really hope you're feeling more confident about tackling this crucial standard now. If this helped, do us a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to ICAN Intelligence for more. And definitely drop a comment below and let us know which standard you want to master next. Until then, happy studying.